Are you ready to work?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep. I want you to believe God that He is going to deliver what He promised on the flyer that you probably saw. Don't remember exactly what it said, but it said you would receive tools. I want you to expect to receive new tools or know how to use your tools better. It really is going to give you freedom from some things, because the devil's happy if we have faith as long as it's for tomorrow, not today. Or even believe in everything God did yesterday, right?
Yep.
But will He do it today, and will He do it for me? So right now, just tell yourself, have your spirit command your soul. We're going to choose to believe God for today, even now. I'm going to choose to believe that He loves me as good as He does anybody else. He's no respecter of persons. And He desires my freedom and healing more than I desire it. Sometimes we know we're happy with the self-help books and we're happy with coping mechanisms. And I learned a lot of good things being in mental health for years, but it was mostly coping. It was mostly identifying the problem. I wasn't introduced to the power to change. So then I was more aware of how I needed to change and no more able to do it. I spent more money on books. I listened to tapes. I had this picture that I should have Christian tapes just attached to my belt and just play them all the time. Maybe that would help me get over my anger. But it didn't. He was driving me to Himself, and He did. I want you to be aware of some things that people tried to make me aware of. It took me forever, and my prayer is today that you'll go ahead and receive God's Word at face value, no matter what anybody else has said that disagrees with it. The Bible says, in whatever ways you honor your father and mother, things will go well with you all the days of your life. And you think, well, that's great for some people. It was impossible to honor my father and mother. But God knows your heart. He knows what your intent was. He also knows that little children, preschoolers, don't understand all these things. So what did He do? He died on the cross so that you could not only be forgiven of the ways you didn't honor your father and mother, but you could also receive freedom from automatic reactions that were set up even before you started school. You could receive freedom from inner vows you made that were not made in humility and honor, that were, I will never be like you. It's not honor. And you might say, well, that was actually a good decision. God doesn't want me to be like them, but not with that attitude. That you can do it in your own strength and you're better than them or something. And I use the example, if you see a policeman in the intersection with that white glove up and he's telling you to stop and you know he's a philanderer or he's in illegal business practices or living a double life, does that mean you don't have to stop? You still have to honor it, right? And that's what we're talking about. There are many ways that not only that we felt like we couldn't honor our parents and we tried, but actually we just chose not to. We didn't honor them. See, I tell people, if you will take the crosswalk prayer, turn it over, and when you're talking about bringing things to the cross, if you will just start listing all your parents' faults and weaknesses, you'll find that quite a few come to your mind right away. You know it's a safe thing to do? If it comes to your mind right away, and you might say they were great people, fine, but if it comes to your mind right away, assume that you probably judged them and dishonored them. Judge not like spiritual discernment, but with condemnation. Assume that you probably dishonored them at some point. You might say, well, that was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Do you know the devil doesn't care? It doesn't expire after 7 years. So what am I talking about? God has spiritual laws. If you don't hear anything else today, maybe you'll at least hear this. It's my prayer. God has spiritual laws, and you don't break them, they break you. And you can choose to think that they're not relevant today. It doesn't change anything. If your toddler or your grandchild steps off an upstairs balcony, and they don't know about the law of gravity or don't believe in it, do they still fall? Do they fall even though they're just 2 or 3 and it's not fair because they haven't studied gravity yet? They still fall. And it's the same way with honor your father and mother. You can hear this and you can go away and not make that list or not write down the things that come to your mind that you dishonored your father and mother for. And all that's going to do is make you more accountable for what you haven't done. Because now you will have heard. Or you can see the easy way out that Jesus has provided, and you can do something with it. He has said, if you will confess your sin, I'll be faithful and just to not only forgive you that, but all the other unrighteousness that I didn't bring to your mind because I'm too nice to overload you with it. But if you're thinking of areas right now where you dishonored your father and mother, and it doesn't matter whether you were 2 or 20 or 42, if you will confess it, that means just agree with God. You know, they weren't behaving honorably, but it's my responsibility that I didn't even try that time to honor them. I talked about them. I accused them. I falsely accused them. I judged them with condemnation, not just spiritual discernment. If you will write those things down, you can get free of that today. And some of you are thinking, she doesn't have a clue what I went through. And I want you to know that I do. And I'm a woman with grit. And a lot of the people that find me on the internet find me because they're looking for somebody that understands the worst kinds of abuse there is. And I do. And they want somebody that will believe them when they say, I was raised in this ritual abuse and it was this bad. And I've heard it so many times, I believe them. And they have taught me. They've taught me. You can't get all this from a book. Maybe you can, but I wasn't faithful enough to try. They have taught me and taught me and taught me over the years what it's like to be raised by people that are in agreement with the devil. And what the devil wants to do is to fracture your identity, whether you're in a situation like that or no matter what your situation. One of his primary goals, but what they taught me is one of the primary goals of the devil is to so fracture your identity by the time you're 2 years old that you're down in God. Where was God when the parents were given out? What was he thinking? Why couldn't he have blessed me like he did them? Why couldn't I be in a different spot or a different race or a different reading group? I'm not the best reading group. God didn't equip me. And some of us are still saying that. It's just our situations have changed. It's not the reading group anymore. You know what I mean? But the devil's plan is to convince you that God is not faithful. It's like this twofold plan. It's one of the biggest things that I see. First, he wants you to not receive what God says about you. That you're complete, you're lacking nothing. You're a container of all the power that there is. Anything he asks you to do, you can do it. Because if you will let him do it through you, he's got it all. And when we have him, we have it all. But also, he wants you to believe. See, because you didn't know that or you didn't believe it. You know, that you're lacking. You believe you're lacking and incomplete and not loved like other people. He also wants you to believe it's because God's not faithful. Every time we doubt and go into fear, we feel intimidated and worried, it's a reflection on God. It's a tip as to how we really believe about God. Some of us aren't quite that clear about it. We'll just say, oh, well, God would never ask me to do that. And it just sounds so humble. But see, humility, when they hear God asking them to do it, they don't look at their own resources and their own abilities and their own talents separate from Jesus. They say, yes, sir. That's what humility says, instead of like Moses, you know, I can't do it, God. I can't do it. Give me a helper that can believe you. That's basically what he was saying. Apparently he improved along the way.
40 years will get you.
Yeah. Sheep, smelling sheep will finally get through to you. God is better. If he's telling me I'm a sheep and even sheep can hear God, maybe my theology has been wrong. Maybe my theology needs to change and agree with the Bible. A lot of us have theology that isn't really biblically based. It's built on all the whining and negativity that we learned from our ancestors. So the first thing I'd like you to do, if you'll turn this over and look at this sign, is get a bead on the devil's plan for you. God had a plan, as we've said, for you to be one with him, to know that you're complete, you're lacking nothing. He wants you to be secure, believing that God and I are majority. The only time I need to feel insecure is if I'm flat out disobeying God. But the devil has a plan. He wants to take over not only you, but your whole household. And he started generations before you were born. And when I do the restoration prayer ministry, I help people to see, you came by all these doubts and fears and worries, or I call them furries, doubts, and weirs. Honestly, before you were ever born, the enemy was convincing your parents to make poor choices. Convincing them to look to other sources besides God to get their needs met. Convincing them that compromise and sin is a good thing because we've prayed and God hadn't come through, so we'll just do the best we can. And those are the believers. Now then there's the unbelievers. But they were deceived too. So what I forbid you to do today is blame parents and blame ancestors. That's more judgment and dishonor. That digs your hole deeper. Don't go there. They were deceived too. We've all had levels of deception, okay? We're all in the same boat. So we need to put our finger down and not be pointing at other people, but we do need to forgive them. And so the first step to real healing and freedom is to be willing to forgive the people that taught you doubt and unbelief and fear and that you're not adequate and you're, can't reach the board, that taught you that. I want you to draw a cross on your paper. You can draw it by that house if you want. Draw a cross and draw the kind that has the circle in the middle.
Carlotta, you want us to turn the camera to follow you?
No, but
I'll
just if you bring it over, that'd be good. Draw that cross, and we're going to think in terms.
You want me to draw the cross or move the camera?
You can draw the cross. That'd be great. You want to do that, Carla? I really appreciate that. Carla's preparing the board, but then you have to move the camera. If you just bring this, just move the board. That is it. I didn't think ahead of time, but God's grace is sufficient. Amen. Thank you. I'll draw the cross. What we need to do, and something that really liberated me, seriously, literally, is when I learned to ask forgiveness 5 ways. And you might think, like my friend that became a psychologist, this is too tricky. God would never be this tricky. But all I'm doing is quoting to you verses that you have known and said you believe all along. It's good to honor parents, right? Okay. It's good to confess sin, and when you confess sin one to another, you yourselves are healed. You have more. Even if it's crooked, it works. It's good to confess. It's healing, the Bible says. We've got horizontal relationships and vertical ones, and a relationship with ourselves. The devil's plan, like many of you have already studied, is to separate you out. The banana that's separated from the bunch gets eaten first. He wants to separate you out and separate you from your relationships with other people, and he sets them up to misunderstand you, to hurt your feelings and leave you out, or even to on purpose hurt you. And he wants to separate you from yourself because he wants you to, instead of blaming him for causing this confusion and these disagreements, he wants you to blame yourself or them. And even to hate yourself, because he doesn't want you to believe that there are these imps speaking to you, telling you you're no good. You never were. Your gene pool sucks. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. But isn't that what he does?
Yes.
And that's what he does? He talks like I don't talk like that. He wants you to believe you were shortchanged from the beginning. Like he had Eve believing God's holding out on you, here it is. And he's always ready. You know what your apple is. God's telling you right now. Here's what you need that's outside of what God has for you. So, don't let the day get away. Don't let him get away with it. Identify what it is and write it down. So, when I learned to ask forgiveness 5 ways, I was able to get rid of his loopholes. Because I wanted to obey God, but I wouldn't realize that I needed to forgive several ways. And so my obedience was usually incomplete. In 2 Corinthians 10:4 through 6, it not only talks about tearing down every high thing and pretense and everything we think is knowledge that lifts itself up against the knowledge of God. But the next verse it says, and when your obedience is complete, See, and mine was incomplete. And on the healing thing, I went to so many counselors, but the Bible says, my priests have healed my people partially. But I didn't know what complete was. Well, here's part of it. We not only need to get this uncovered too long. We not only need to forgive the others for what they did to us or didn't do that they should have done. But see, forgiving other people, see, I hated this part, was only 20% of the problem. I didn't like that. And I knew I needed to ask God to forgive me for my own sins, my part in it. Sometimes it's totally an assault and you have no part in it, you're totally innocent. But the things that were tripping up my life were the seeds that I had sowed. You only reap what you sow. No matter how terrible your ancestors were, you don't reap what they sowed, you reap what you sowed. And that's my sinful reactions to them. So I had to ask God to forgive me for my own sins. I had to ask God to forgive me for judging and dishonoring them. And you can say, oh, this is too hard. Well, it's not as hard as the life you've been living.
Amen.
When you find out that there's a pattern, like I had a pattern of reaping deceptive people, it gets old. It seems like I was getting this disproportionate larger number of deceptive people. And you know what? I was. Because the more I judged them, the more I got. You have the power to stop this. And you say, well, you have to discern people. Exactly right. You discern them, but you do not have the right to say, move over, God, I'm going to judge and condemn them. And God says, there is no excuse for you, O man, who judges your brother. And they're not my brother. God sees it differently. Then we need to ask God to forgive us for blaming Him. Like He started this reaping cycle. It's not about what I sowed and my sinful reactions. God let this happen to me. It came to me out of the blue. God protects other people and not me. It's not that, honey. It's if you sow it, you're going to reap it, and how much?
Greater and later.
Greater and later. More and later. You always sow. However many years it's been since you judged and dishonored this character for doing these terrible things, and believe me, I have quite a collection of them in my flowery story. But the more years I let go by, the more of them I had. And I began to realize I'm the central figure in this scenario. What I didn't like was that, sometimes in the South, it's considered humble. I just can't forgive myself. To beat yourself up, put yourself on restriction. I'm never going to be able to get back on God's plan A. That's what I believed. God will never use me. I'm this, I'm that. We need to forgive ourselves. Because the greatest commandment is what? Love the Lord your God. And who else? You're commanded to love yourself?
Yep.
I was 35 before I started liking myself. But it's just been a lot more recently that I began to realize God likes me. He doesn't just love me because He has to. So what I'm going to be challenging you today is start this. You can draw this on a napkin on an airplane, in a restaurant. You can teach someone this anywhere. The thing of it is, most of us know a lot, but we don't practice it. See, we already knew we should forgive others, that we should ask God to forgive us for our part in it, even if we think it's 2%.
1%.
Or 1. Okay, even you. We knew that God told us it's not our place to judge other people. See, we're all children. He's the Father. You know how you felt when your brother or sister tried to boss you around? You want to make it clear to them they're one of the children, not the parents. Well, that's how God feels when we are judging other people. He knows we're digging a pit for our own demise because we're trying to take His spot. And then we blamed Him and said, God didn't protect me. These are laws, ladies and gentlemen. When you break His laws that say, do not judge, do not dishonor, you will reap what you sow. He says don't even make vows, doesn't He? We're going to talk about those too. Fleshly inner vows. I'll never be like you. So I want you to write down the persons in your ancestry line especially. But he might tell you a teacher or a coach, oh boy, a yoga teacher, somebody that has a big influence on your life, and you still remember what they said over you or how they hurt you. If you still remember it, you can be sure it should be on your forgiveness list. It's not that God wipes out our memory when we forgive, but it's safe. If you forgive somebody and you've already done it, no harm done. But I bet you didn't know to forgive in 5 ways. This was a real eye-opener to me, because while my friend was saying this is too tricky, I was saying, if this will stop that cycle of my broken relationships, and especially with deceptive people, I'll do this 50 times in one day. Whatever God says to do, I'll do it. I would like good relationships. I want to quit reaping people that are like the people I judged last time. And now I get 2 instead of 1. And next time I get 3 instead of 1. It works. God makes it so simple that a child can do it. And He's not trying to be tricky. He says, you know these verses. Carlotta's not telling you anything new. Just do them all at once instead of leaving loopholes.